Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Today's subject is feints and misdirection. Cao Cao, Sima Yi, and other notable commanders employed feints and false displays to considerable advantage in conflicts of varying scope over the centuries. Even the least accomplished generals sometimes were successful in resorting to them. Although first broached in the art of war, China's traditional military writings all advocate misdirecting the enemy's attention, thereby implementing the ploy of feinting in the east and striking in the west. In a chapter appropriately titled The Distant in Warfare, the 100 Unorthodox Strategies advises, quote, "Whenever you and an enemy oppose each other on opposite banks of a river, if you want to ford the river far off, you should prepare numerous boats and oars to show that you intend to cross nearby. The enemy will certainly mass their troops in response. Then you can cross at some undefended point." The paragraph concludes by citing the important tactical principle found in the art of war. When your objective is distant, make it appear nearby. Now, the correlated chapter, Nearby in Warfare, which similarly concludes with an art of war assertion, when your objective is nearby, make it appear distant, states, "Whenever you and an enemy deploy on opposite banks of a river, if you want to attack close by, you should instead show you're going to attack far off. You must establish the facade of numerous troops preparing to ford the river both upstream and downstream. The enemy will certainly divide their forces in response. You can then secretly launch a sudden attack with your nearby hidden forces and destroy their army. And this is exactly what happens at Lija River, which we'll talk about later. Normally implemented through highly visible, localized displays designed to draw attention to a specific point rather than some kind of nebulous facade intended to diffuse the enemy's focus, feints compel the enemy to shift their troops and abandon well-planned deployments. When adroitly executed, they create exploitable fissures, and they facilitate the execution of advantageous tactics. The Hu Chenjing even suggested employing a surprisingly elaborate physical display to fix the enemy's attention. Quote, "If you are approaching a border along a great lake or a torrential gorge that you cannot quickly cross, you should halt the army, build bastions, and chisel trees and carve wood to fabricate numerous boats and watercraft in order to show that you will definitely cross there. Then in the middle of the night, you should secretly order elite troops with gagged mouths to silently deploy bamboo rafts, cross at some other location, and strike the enemy's riverside encampments before they ensconce themselves and hold their positions and await disorder in the enemy's troops. Our forces lying in ambush should then follow up on rafts." Simply setting out observation posts throughout constricted mountains and marshy terrain is said to give the appearance of advancing. However, apparently ensconcing the army for a lengthy period and seemingly remaining inactive was also thought to be effective. Quote, "Whenever occupying fortifications opposite the enemy, if you want to launch a sudden attack against them, you should gather large amounts of grass and branches and make your flags and pennants numerous in order to create the appearance of a populated encampment. If you force the enemy to prepare in the east and then you strike in the west, you will inevitably be victorious." Now, one of the late Qing dynasty's 36 stratagems is straightforwardly called "make a sound in the east, suddenly strike in the west." The text laconically states, quote, "When the enemy's will is confused and opaque, they won't anticipate developments. Take advantage of their lack of self-mastery and seize them." And the chapter includes two examples that well illustrate the basic principles. Quote, "In the former Han, when the 7 feudatories rebelled, Zhou Yafu solidified his fortifications, but refused to engage in battle. When the troops from Wu raced to the southeast corner, Yafu prepared in the northwest. When everything had been prepared, Wu's elite soldiers, in fact, attacked the northwest, but they were unable to penetrate the fortifications. This is an example of the enemy not being confused. At the end of the later Han, when Zhu Jun surrounded a yellow turban force at Yuan, he stretched the encirclement, erected forts, and raised earthen mounds in order to overlook the city's interior. When he drummed and attacked in the southwest, the yellow turban troops all raced there. Zhu then personally led 5,000 picked soldiers in an assault on the northeast that penetrated the city by taking advantage of the emptiness. This is a case of the enemy's will being confused and opaque, and lacking anticipation. As the two examples show, success isn't guaranteed. The entree therefore concludes, quote, when implementing the technique of making a sound in the east and attacking in the west, it's necessary to see whether the enemy's will is confused or not before deciding whether to proceed. If they're confused, you'll be victorious. If not, the general will bring defeat and death upon himself. So it's a dangerous ploy. A sense of the importance of feints can be gained from a few chapter titles found in the important military writings. The Tang Tongdian initiated the categorical recognition of feints with two chapters, simply titled Announce a Strike in the East, Actually Strike in the West, and Manifest a Disposition There, but Attack Here. Thereafter, showing the continuity of traditional thought, the Wujing Zongyao increased the number of three. The new one being, when the enemy strikes the southeast, prepare in the northwest. The early Song also saw the Hu Chenjing offer a lengthy explication of methods that, quote, display objectives that are nearby, but gain victory far off. The introduction states, warfare is the Tao of deception. Deception can make the empty appear full, the distant appear near, and the near appear distant. Those who excel at attacking the enemy frighten them to the front and then assault the rear. They make a sound in the east and then strike in the west. Once China began correlating clouds of dust with enemy activity, astute commanders employed them to deceive enemy observers as to the army's strength, the movement, and deployment. In summarizing what must have been common knowledge at the end of the spring and autumn period, the art of war had already drawn attention to the possibilities. Therefore, simply creating dust at some remote location or dragging brush off into the distance could convey an impression of an army approaching or moving away without requiring it to actually undertake any movement at all. The simple defeat of feinting east, attacking west, wasn't confined to assaults on fortified cities and open field armies, but was also exploited by the besieged to facilitate sallies against aggressor forces. The Tongdian and other Chinese military writings preserve several examples of this technique. Raids might be initially conducted from out of one quarter, then circumstances contrived to make it appear the next assault would emanate from exactly the same location, but then they would go forth from the opposite side and unexpectedly attack the enemy's flank or rear. Theoretical discussions of feints tend to center on a couple of famous implementations that are therefore well worth reviewing here. Han Xin, the surpassing commander who we've met before, and whose unorthodox field tactics were instrumental in establishing the Han dynasty in the last decade of the 3rd century BC, succeeded partly by resorting to feints. Ordered to subjugate King Bao of Wei because King Bao had renounced his former allegiance to Liu Bang, the Han dynasty's progenitor and first emperor, Han Xin increased his troops, and he prepared a fleet of boats at a place called Linjin to convince King Bao he was determined to cross there despite heavy opposition. However, he concurrently dispatched a small amphibious assault force to Shaiyang, where they employed makeshift rafts cobbled together from earthenware jars lashed between spears to reach the far bank. The contingent then proceeded along the river until positioned to launch the unexpected flank attack that devastated Wei's army. Han Xin thus pacified the area east of the Yellow River. In contrast, the much earlier epochal battle of Linsa River, in which the southeastern state of Yue, then newly risen from the ashes of King Goujian's dedicated efforts, virtually exterminated Wu's armies, provides a complementary example, showing how distracting the enemies at a distant point can be accomplished. After evading Wu in 478 BC, Yue's forces encountered the enemy at the Linsa River near Wu's capital of Su, which is near present-day Wuxi in Jiangsu. However, Wu's 60,000 troops outnumbered Yue's highly motivated army, and Wu also enjoyed a significant strategic advantage in being well ensconced on the river's eastern bank. Gojien resorted to tactics designed to stir confusion in his opponent's well-organized forces, much in accord with Swinsome's dictum that, quote, one who excels at warfare compels men, it is not compelled by others. He segmented his troops into 4 operational groups, and then secretly dispatched one of them about 2 li to the north and another a similar distance to the south, just as described in the theoretical discussion just quoted. And he retained 2 units in place. Then, in marked contrast to the stealthy effort normally demanded by a surprise attack, he ordered the dispersed forces to undertake a noticeably noisy crossing in the middle of the night. Startled by threats on his flanks, King Fuchai hastily dispatched large numbers of core troops to defend the northern and southern perimeters. Spearheaded by 6,000 elite warriors, Yue's core forces then silently crossed the river and reformed before they suddenly drummed an attack with a horrendous din. The panic-stricken defenders, who had been racing out to the flanks, chaotically turned about to repel this frontal attack, only to suffer shattering strikes at their rear. As the art of war remarks, when someone excels at attacking, the enemy does not know where to mount his defense. Easily dominating the battlefield, Yue's rampaging forces forced Wu's remnant troops some 20 li into the interior, where they were again overwhelmed despite reforming. King Fuchai barely managed to escape by fleeing to Wu's fortified capital with just 10,000 men, and he managed to survive for another 5 years, but in 473 BC, he was finally captured and committed suicide, resulting in Wu's extinction. As attested by their repeated employment to great effect in both China and the West, feints don't need to be this complex to achieve significant results. In fact, martial displays intended to distract the enemy's focus more than threaten them were often employed. A successful feint might even be mounted by just a few men blowing trumpets, stacking assault ladders against a city wall, or placing dummies on parapets, not to mention rumors and supposedly leaked information. As always, thank you for watching.